Okay. Okay, it's being recorded now. All right, so different stages: idea stage, validation, early traction, fantastic. So growth, expansion, maturity. Yes, or yes, I'm now saying validation, prototyping, early traction, growth, and so on. And as I said earlier, my role today is not so much about teaching about each one of these stages of the startup. What I really want to share today is just some ideas to what you should be doing, regardless of the stage where you are in terms of your startup building journey. Help link that startup building journey to your own requirement as an individual of showing yourself as being globally attractive, and also help link it with the journey towards, for those that are looking at one tech visa or the other, link it also towards the journey of tech talent visas that are available to people who have shown themselves as globally attractive talents. And that's the journey we're going to be going through together today. So I will show you this, and I'm not saying that this is the gospel in terms of stages of building a startup, but I'm going to show you this as something to consider in terms of the stages that a typical startup will go through. And these are stages where a typical startup will go through in terms of the startup building process. You typically will start with ideating, where you're thinking about the various ideas, thinking about problems. We usually say start with a problem, don't start with a solution. There are rare cases where starting with a solution will work, to say, is there a way AI can help with X? Yes, that could work from time to time, but more important is start with a problem and then figure out ways in which you want to deal and solve that problem. And then you go to conceptualizing, where you are now trying to figure out, oh, what is the best way to solve this problem? What are the different ways we can use to get it done? What are channels that we can build to get it sorted? Should we be looking at a certain segment of the market? And so on. Committing, because you don't, yes, you can do all of these ideas and all, but at some point you want to figure out to say, this is the one that we are going to be doing. And whatever it is you're committing to, you want to validate. You want to make sure that this actually would work. This is where sometimes you want to build what is called the MVP, the minimum viable product. And that minimum viable product, you want to be able to launch it to some segment of your customer category and use those customer feedback and lack of feedback as well to continue ideating on your product, to continue building your product, to continue figuring out to see if this product is going to deliver what it is that we are hoping it will deliver. Then you will go on to the case of scaling, to say you've built the MVP is doing very well, and then you are now at the point where you are establishing your own market dominance in a particular segment. You're selling to many more customers. You're now at a growth phase, maybe raised a Series A, and so on. And there are different fundraising levels in terms of different funding that is available for different startups at these stages. But then the question, and so this is just an example of the different stages of a startup. But what I want us to then discuss is that, what can I do at the ideating phase to help my own individual profile while I am building this next possible unicorn? What can I do at the conceptualization phase that can help my profile in terms of this journey to building this startup? What can I do at the next stage that can help my profile of what it is that I'm trying to build or put out there? What can I do at the point where my startup is scaling? Are there things I should do consciously so that those things will help my journey of me being globally attractive? What do I mean? And when I say being globally attractive, I'll use the example of tech-enabled visas, because I run a platform, Emigr8, where we are focused on tech visas. And many of these tech visas are available for individuals who have been able to show that they are leading talents, they've made significant impact, they've delivered innovation in their own sector. A number of countries of the world have made these visas available to say the best predictor of future performance is your past performance. If you've done it before, you can possibly do it again. In fact, the world understands that because 9 out of every 10 startups fail, the world understands that the chances of your next startup, if you built a failed startup before, the chances of your next startup being successful is very high. And if you've had 2 failed startups before, the chances of your next startup being successful is very high, as long as you have learned lessons. And so some of the investors we speak with, one of the things they say is, the question they typically will ask is, what did you learn? Yes, you had this failed startup. Yes, a lot of money was invested. A lot of your own time was invested. And then the startup failed for whatever reason. But what did you learn in that journey? What did you learn in that process? And a number of investors say that, oh, they don't want to fund founders who did not learn a lesson, viable lesson, because if you didn't learn that lesson, then you may need to learn it again elsewhere, or you may need to learn it again in your next startup. But because you've learned, you've grown capacity, you've grown muscle, a number of investors are interested. They are interested in having conversations with you and possibly funding your next venture. But it's the same thing with many of these countries of the world as well, to say they want their jurisdiction to have the highest number of innovation. The UK, for example, wants to become the fintech capital of the world. What that means to them is that if you're thinking of fintech unicorn, they should be domiciled in their jurisdiction. America, the US, America is technically the technology capital of the world at this point. Of course, China is giving them a run for their money, but it is at the moment. And so if you're thinking Silicon Valley and the different hubs within the US, you would know that there's a lot there in terms of innovation and so on. But the US also wants to retain their place at that top in terms of thinking around unicorns, around ideas, around innovation, around impact, around patents, around licenses, around intellectual property, and so on. So this battle is on across the world. And because this battle is on, these countries are interested to say, if you are able to show that you've built product-led innovation, if you've done it before, you can do it again. Which is to say the next one you're building will not be the one that will be a unicorn. Unicorn is, by definition, a company valued at $1 billion or above. Which is to say that's not going to be what would happen. Because, take note, Facebook was not Mark Zuckerberg's first startup. And many of the founders that you know today, that are popular today, that have been mega successful today, and even many that you may not know of, but they've been successful, many of them, it wasn't their first startup. There were some edge cases where it was their first startup. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's an absolute rule, but I'm just saying that for some, it wasn't their first startup. In some cases, not even their second startup. But they had cushions. They were able to get back up again. They were able to build on new ideas and so on. But here's the question for you. How will the industry know these things about you if you don't put it out there? How will the industry know these things about you if you don't talk about it? How will the industry know these things about you if they don't stumble on it? And these are the kinds of conversation that I'm hoping that this session will inspire on us, or at least bring to your consciousness. Ideation phase. What are the things that you can do? What if you start showing yourself as a subject matter expert in the sector that you are trying to build for? If you're already a subject matter expert in that sector, maybe this is the time when you want to deepen your impact in that sector. Maybe this is the time when you want your ecosystem, your social network, your immediate circle, your friend circle, maybe other things that you're doing. Let them start knowing that, oh, you do have an interest in this sector. What if you are bouncing ideas around your ecosystem? Wouldn't it be nice for X to happen? Wouldn't it be nice for Y to happen? Why is this like this? Why is this problem like this? And then start driving conversations along those lines. Guess what? The industry starts paying attention. Not that at this point you haven't built anything. At this point, you haven't even written any line of code. At this point, you are still trying to figure out what is going to work and so on. What if at the next stage where you are conceptualizing, you're doing that in the open? One of the ways in which we ask people to do that from time to time is for you to go to the users and get user feedback. In the olden days, we would say that, oh, don't do any code until your users have given you feedback. That was in the old. Now we are in the agile world where we build, we show the user, you fix the moving train, you fix the train as it's moving. So you build something, build an MVP, get it as quickly as possible in the hands of the user. As they're using it, you want to start fixing it. As they're using it, you want to start iterating. As they're using it, you want to start making it better, adding more features, adding things that were not working before, and so on to that, to it. And this is part of what you can be doing around the conceptualization phase. I will talk a lot about social media, but the truth is that it's not just social media. You can do this if you attend events, for example, you happen to be in an industry event. You can start talking about what it is that you're doing. You can write blog posts. If you have opportunity to be in the press and so on, you can start ensuring that some of these thinking some of these things to deal with, you start putting them in the press. You start talking about them, start becoming a subject matter expert, visibly both in your small network, in your wider circle, and possibly in the entire industry. And now that in itself starts helping people see you in a certain light. Even if you are not doing it for the sake of your startup, because sometimes even your startup needs you as the founder, as the main parent of that startup, needs you to do these same things I'm talking about. But today I'm hoping that we are thinking, as we're building your startup, you are thinking about your personal profile. Gone are the days where founders could afford to hide behind their brands, behind their startup. That world is gradually disappearing. For many brands that you know of today, you probably also know who the founders are. Because that's the world that we are in. When I started out in the industry, I like hiding as well. I used to, I still do actually, but yeah, I'm having this conversation with you. You could do that. You could hide behind your brand. Your brand could be a faceless brand and so on. Gradually, that world is disappearing. And I'm going to talk about AI in a moment. That world is disappearing because a number of users, particularly in this world of Web 3.0, the social web, users want to connect face a brand. And so, yes, your brand may need these same things I'm talking about, but I'm asking you today to be strategic about your own individual profile. With the likes of the UK Global Talent Visa, for example, one of the things that is important to them when they assess individuals is that what did you do in this overall success? So yes, you can say we built this startup that became acquired 100,000 users, and we had significant ARR. We were doing annual recurring revenues in the tens of thousands or in the hundreds of thousands or in the millions. But that is good. But what did you do? Whether you are an employee, whether you're a founder, but I'm focused on you building a startup today. What did you do? They are interested in that. And they are not just interested in that from the perspective of you just saying it. They also want to see documentary evidence that the things that you're saying is true. And so what I'm saying in the nutshell, if you don't take anything away from what I'm talking about today, is that consciously build your personal profile as you are building this, your potential next unicorn. And there are ideas of what you can do at the different stages of that, even at the point where you're ideating, to the point where you're conceptualizing, to the point when your startup has started gaining some traction, has started making some success. Be visible, gain exposure, be able to tell your story of even growth. Because a number of times as we are building, and sometimes when we are building in the open, you are also learning, you are also growing, you're also growing capacity. Consider doing some of those in the open, maybe blog posts, maybe LinkedIn posts, maybe tweets in the right places, maybe public relations, maybe have a little bit of public relations budget, so that when you have things that are newsworthy, you are able to be in the right conversations at the right time. This is something that a number of my peers, and I particularly, was not doing many years back, but I have seen the value of it. And that's part of the reason why we're having this conversation, to say, as you continue to grow, and if you have an opportunity to work in a startup as well, to say, yes, you're not the founder, you're working in a startup, you're working in a product-led organization and so on, you can also, with permission, make sure that you get the right permission and so on. But you can also start telling your story. Start telling your story of impact. Start telling your story of how you've been able to help this product, this company, this team, this organization in this certain way. Please ensure that it is specific and measurable. Don't just say we were very successful. Be clear the aspect that you handled and what you did and how you did it. They talk about the model that you should use when you're talking to around interviews, right? The same model, and it's similar as well. Be specific around what it was that was the problem, what was the situation, what was the task that you had, what were the actions that you did, and what was the result. Whether the result was success or not, the industry is interested in the kinds of things that you are doing. If you're a technical person and you have the opportunity to, one of the funny roles that it's very interesting sometimes is when you say, and I'm a CTO of a number of organizations, when you say you're a CTO, sometimes it's not clear. Are you the CTO of a 20,000 man organization, 20,000 person organization, or are you the CTO of you, yourself, and I? You're both the CTO and the individual contributor and the software developer, because that title is actually a leveler. You could be anywhere in between. You could just be the software developer, but since you are the only engineering person, you are the only technical person in that company, you are CTO. Or you could be the CTO of Microsoft, for example. Both of you are CTO. But tell your story. Tell the story behind the story. If you have the time, the likes of TikTok and so on are things that are also important. But the key thing is tell your story. They say that if until the lion learns to tell its story, the hunter will always be the hero. The way I understand that, it's not a proverb, that saying, the way I understand that saying is that in some cases, the lion is just chilling in its home, and the hunter decided to come to its home and then shot it, killed it, and all of that. But as far as we're concerned, oh, hunter killed the lion. Fantastic. This is the hero of the story. Sometimes whoever tells their story first is also considered the hero, because before people go and find out what the actual truth is, they've already picked the first information given and they've ran with it. I've said a lot of things so far. I've said a lot of things as to what you should consider, but I want to pause at this point for us to ask questions. But I want to talk a little bit about AI before I do that pause. Because AI has changed the game. And a number of people may say, oh, because there's AI now, and there's a lot that can be automated, there are AI agents, we are coming into the world of physical AI, there's not much we can do any longer in terms of innovation. There's not much we can do any longer in terms of ideas. There's not much we can do any longer in terms of building companies that are innovative, viable, and scalable. That is not true. The truth is that as of today, because of the advent of AI, there's a lot of disruption happening. And it is up to you to take a decision to say you want to position yourself as one of the people using AI for positioning, using AI for the future. They used to yab a number of startups online, that is, that they used to call them AI rappers, to say your entire business model is something that AI, you are basically building a front end on top of an LLM or a foundational model. But the truth is that all of that is adding value. And that value today is what you see as Claude Code, Cursor, and a number of the AI IDEs, vibe coding IDEs that we have today. And it's similar across many industries. You may want to be one of the champions of your industry, your domain, and how you are applying AI to your industry vertical. And I don't care what industry vertical that you are in. It is similar to where we were 20 years ago, or maybe 25 years ago, in the advent of the internet. There were industries then. And all of these industries, gradually, we started figuring out that, oh, we can sell books online, Amazon. Oh, I can put my pictures online, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. Oh, I would like to have real-time conversation about what is going on around me, Twitter. And what happened is that we started building products, solutions based on the things that humans have done in the past. I would say to you that there will always be banking, but it is possible we may not need banks anymore. And some of us may actually be banking, but you are not actually using a bank, because there are now digital banks and there are now fintechs that are able to do things in that area. All of this came from the advent of the internet. And so, although a number of jobs were lost, a number of jobs no longer exist, the likes of typists, and you can drop in the chat some of the jobs that no longer exist. Many new roles were created. Many new organizations were created, and many new startups were created. And so we are in the era where many new ideas can be created, and those ideas can potentially scale very quickly. Why? Because before now, you may have needed a team of 10 developers to build this, your fantastic new idea. But now you could possibly do it yourself if you have the time. Yes, you can possibly build your entire application yourself if you have the time. because we are now in the era of vibe coding. Of course, please be careful. For those that are following on the internet, there was this app Teapots that it didn't get hacked. It was just they didn't secure their data properly, and so all of their users' data was exposed on the Firebase bucket on the internet for such a long time. Eventually, something that discovered, they released it to the world. So be careful in terms of ensuring security, ensuring best practices, and so on. But the point I'm making is that hypothetically, you can build this your next big idea by yourself, launch it, everything you want to do. It no longer takes 2 weeks. You can do it overnight, depending on what the idea that you are building is. And there are many more ideas that can be created. And that is where I want to pause. And then I'm going to pause for questions at this point. Because YC is one of the organizations, any of the unicorns that exist in the world today. YC always releases something to say, these are some people, and these are, you can think of these more as categories. These are ideas that they would like to see, people would like to see how they will be solved. These are ideas that they know that because of the advent of AI in this case, many of these RFS, requests for startup, for this batch of YC, Y Combinator, they are talking about how AI will change things. And so these are some of the ideas that YC is tracking to say a number of workers are going to lose their job. We say in the Bincom world to say AI will not take your job, but somebody using AI will take your job. A number of functions that used to need 10 people, they now need 2 people to do those functions. And the reason for the 2 people is because one person will do the job, the other person is redundancy, just in case the first person gets sick, goes on leave, decides to quit, there's somebody else that can perform that role. The world no longer needs, in an organization setting, no longer needs junior developers. The business model back in the days was that you bring in junior developers in your organization, and those junior developers will grow under the tutelage and the supervision of a senior developer. The senior developers will be the one accountable for some of the delivery that the junior does. And so when the junior writes code, there will be a pull request, a PR, and then that PR will be reviewed. They will make mistakes. Some of those mistakes will be corrected. And then based on all of that, eventually their code gets into production. And the more they do that, the more they grow capacity, experience, and so on. Now, with the advent of these vibe coders, these AI tools, these AI agents, all of this is no longer needed. In fact, we are coming to a point where we may not need software developers alone anymore. Because what, as a software developer, you would be doing is actually configuring the environment. So it's more around what we currently know as DevOps, development plus operations together, infrastructure, all of that together. We're coming to that kind of world. And the point I'm making is that with that level of disruption only, and this is just me talking about the technology sector, there's so many more things that can be built. There are so many more things that can be built on top of it. There's so much more value that can be added on top of what it is that we have. And so these are some of the requests for ideas to say, could you build a startup around retraining workers for the AI economy? And if you're interested in this, maybe you should be having these kinds of conversation in your circle. If you're in physical spaces, start having those conversations, because all of those conversations will start ringing a bell. When somebody comes across opportunities around your area of influence or area of interest, they may think about you. And that starts building your credibility. But guess what? In a year's time, when they say bring evidence of you being globally attractive, some of these things may count, because some of those your conversations may lead to invitations on smaller platforms to say, come and share your idea, come and share your view in smaller platforms. And then that could lead to you being able to be invited on bigger platforms to come and share those same kinds of ideas. It's a gradual process. But the key thing I'm trying to say is consciously build your profile as you are consciously building your startup. And that brings me to the point, and the point I was making here is, if you're looking for idea, there are so many that the world is still looking for. Ideation phase. You can raise a poll to say, what do you guys think? I'm thinking about this, this, and this. And then raise a conversation along those lines. All of those things start counting towards something for you. Ideation phase. At the implementation phase, you want to be, as you're building, you want to talk about what you built, how it works, new features, what is done, what you've not been able to do yet, what issues you found out when you now started running this solution, what kinds of complaints your users have. You may want to build in the open. In the scaling phase, and at this point, your startup is already getting some success, you may want to hype those success. Please don't lie, but you can garnish your image. Don't lie, but you can garnish your image. You can talk about the thing. You can hype the things that you've done. And please notice, for those of you that use LinkedIn, that you see a lot of, I'm happy to inform you that X has happened. I'm happy to inform you that Y has happened. I'm happy to inform you, and so on. You see a lot of those on LinkedIn. There's a reason. Why are you not telling your own story on those kinds of platforms too? Those are the questions that I'm hoping that you are thinking around. And although I focused on startup founders, I focused on encouraging individuals to build startups. These same principles apply even if you're an employee within that same space, or applies even if you're not in the technology world at all. But my focus today was around building startups. A couple of practical things as regards the Bincom world around building startup. Bincom has the Labs by Bincom. It's a pre-incubator program. And what the pre-incubator program does is to help individuals learn how to build startups. And the way we do that is by building a startup. Because the best way to learn how to build a startup is build a startup. Because it's one of the ones that has such a low barrier of entry. Just find a second friend. We usually advise that 2 people, maybe 3, maybe more, but doing it alone can be really, really frustrating. I've done it a number of times. It can be very frustrating. So have a co-founder if you can, and then build something. Find a problem, start with a problem, and then you can build something. And we have a structured program called Labs by Bincom that helps people go through that journey. It's a 3-month program. We bring you with other people who are also interested in building a startup, and you come together, usually different people with different skills. One person may be coming from the business side of technology, another person may be coming from the technical side of technology, and you come together and you think of an idea and then start building that idea under the guidance of a mentor. The mentor would need to approve at different stages of that journey. And also you have a number of learning materials. We use the Y Combinator Startup School learning materials at this point for you to also learn the things that you need to know as regards the startup world. So the likes of, if I said MVP, what does that mean? Series A, what does that mean? The net promoter score, what does that mean? All of those things are things you should know in that industry, if particularly you are entrepreneurial minded and if particularly you are interested in building something that will scale. We also have the incubator program. And with the incubator program, usually it could be a startup from labs, or it could even be a startup that we are incubating, where Bincom is able to actually sponsor. We don't invest cash yet. We hope to in the future. What we do is we invest the likes of software development capability, project management capability, all of the knowledge, technology, and so on needed for that startup, everything needed from a technology perspective, Bincom is able to provide. We're working on building our first fund in the next few months, but that's how we then support with the incubator program, where Bincom takes a small percentage in terms of equity in that startup, and then Bincom is able to support in that way. And so those are support systems available within the ecosystem, within the Bincom ecosystem. And you may want to, once your startup idea has gotten to a certain stage, you may want to start looking at the likes of accelerators. Accelerators would help, usually not at the ideation phase, which is the likes of labs will be able to do, not at the incubation phase, which the likes of the Bincom incubator program would do, but accelerators will now be at the point where your startup already has an MVP, you already have a couple of paying customers, you validated the idea, you now want to accelerate it. A number of accelerators are out there, Techstars, YC, there are a bunch of them that are really popular. There are some less popular ones, which sometimes are even more useful because they have a bone to pick and they really want to stay relevant so that their founders too and their startups too can scale to the next level. And so there's a lot of support there if you're entrepreneurial minded, and there's a lot of support there even if you've decided to say, I want to try my hands at this and see what happens. Fail forward. Be strategic and build your profile as you are building your startup. I hope this was useful, and I'll pause for questions at this point. Thank you. Okay, so hand up, and I see a question in the chat as well. So yeah, so you can use the hand raise button. I'll take questions from the chat, and I'll also take questions from you just unmuting and speaking. So I'll start with Michael. Adegoke, Michael, please go ahead.
Good day, everyone. My question is just regarding just startup experience. If one's, I know we've talked about success and all of that, but we never really pay attention to startup failures, you know. And I know, like some people say, failure is the mother of success, and like you said, we can still fail forward. But in a situation where one startup fails, how can that person explain it, maybe in their CV or in a job interview?
There must be a reason why it failed and be able to learn the lesson. So I spent some time talking about that to say a number of us know that 9 out of every 10 startups will fail because startups by definition are risky. But you should be able to explain why it failed. And there are different structures to be able to do that. So was it that there was no product market fit? Was there a problem with the original idea? Was there a problem with execution? Was there a problem with the team? Was there a problem with maybe marketing? Was there a problem with the strategy that was adopted and it was too late? Was it competition killed your product? Was it that the users went somewhere else eventually? So there's so many things. The key point is, regardless of what it is, make sure that you are failing forward. Make sure you have learned the lesson. And then, of course, learn how to tell your story from the perspective of learning those lessons. The world expects 9 out of every 10 startups to fail. How that helps.
Yeah, thank you. That helped.
All right, then. So Okay. This is not a question. Sometimes an exit strategy, they don't die. Oh, okay. There are conversations in the chat. Okay, Mary, please go ahead.
Eh? Good afternoon, sir. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so
How are
my
you?
my question a little bit continues from where Michael's own ended, because like we're thinking alike. So if for a beginner they have just one startup in their portfolio and they are using that to advertise themselves, but that startup failed, would that be like an impediment for them when they're trying to sell themselves since it's a failed startup? Or with the way they can tell their story, can they still sell themselves to someone that can maybe give them a potential second, an investor that can invest in a second startup for them?
It's even normal that investors are interested in how you failed, how you've learned. So it's actually normal. The only exception is if there's something called founder fraud, and we're seeing a lot of that in the Nigerian tech ecosystem recently, where founders have stolen the company's money. Your company's money is not your money. The investor's money in your company is not your money. And maybe sometimes some founders are not aware, or we need a lot more education there, particularly in Nigeria, but it is not only Nigeria. You will find that even globally, there's a lot of fraud. You can just Google founder fraud and you find a lot of information out there. And of course, that is bad. Don't go there. And sometimes why founder fraud happens sometimes is because there's this saying in the startup world that says fake it till you make it. And it's supposed to be a good thing, but sometimes it ends up being a bad thing because fake it till you make it ends up being you are lying. Right. And sometimes if you are lying in a unregulated space, it's an ethical issue, but it's not a legal issue. But if you're lying in a regulated space like healthcare, which is what happened to Terranos, for example, it's a legal issue in addition to an ethical issue, which it is. So you need to manage all of that properly. Then comes the question of, oh, what if I fail? Would I be blacklisted in the industry? The answer is no. But learn to tell your story. Don't let others tell your story for you. Learn to tell the story of why we failed, what happened, what we did differently, what we could have done differently with hindsight. There's an idea I worked with in the early days of my career, which is now a very, very popular startup. I'm not going to mention the name and all of that. Very popular startup and all of that now. And the reason why it failed when we tried was because we were too early. And so there was no ecosystem and infrastructure to back up what we were trying to build on top of it in that jurisdiction at that time. And so be able to tell your story in those kinds of words and ways. Okay. There's a question in the chat before I go to Emeka. The question in the chat is that we've seen great startup die off. What strategies can we adopt to build startup that will stand out with time? Even with the very best of strategy, statistics tells us that a number of startups will fail. Of course, there are ways in which you should be able to do things better, learn better, make sure you have product market fit, make sure people really want what it is that you're building, make sure you do the things right, make sure you have a complementary team where you have one founder and the other founder, maybe a technical and a business founder, or if you have a bigger team in terms of your founding team, make sure that you have the right complementary skills in your team. Make sure that your strategy is clear. Make sure that your executives are in charge of the key functions. Make sure that you know your numbers. Make sure that you know your North Star metrics. You see, I'm saying a lot of different, and all of these I'm just speaking from the top of my head. Do all of those things well. Your chances of success is higher. But even at that, there are also chances of failing because you are doing an uphill battle. It's what it is. What I'm saying is, as you are building that, also build yourself, your profile, so that should even this thing that you're building not be as successful as you wanted it to be, put your full energy to make sure it's successful. I'm not saying do it half-hearted. You also are living with a significant brand that can help you in your next adventure. Emeka, please go ahead.
Okay, good day, everyone. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Mine is not a question actually, but it's a question. Uh, Basically, when I want to think of startup, something to do to create, I mostly find myself thinking of something someone else is already doing better. Like I don't seem to find a new idea to thrive. So how do I go about something like that?
You can use idea banks. You can use AI to do research for you. I came out about a site just this week, ideabrowser.com, and what they did is they built an LLM to do market research that was a few weeks back actually, build market research into different markets. So on a daily basis, it actually generates ideas of what would be nice to have in the ecosystem, well-researched ideas, looking at what the trends are and so on. And so they have an agent doing that on a daily basis. So use AI, look for market trends. There are structured ideation process, and I'm happy to take you through some of those, but we do have that. Attend hackathons, for example. Attend ideations. Bincom does that once a quarter, and all of that can start sparking something in you. Look out for problems. And when you see some of those problems, think about how this problem can be solved. You may start coming up with ideas. You may start coming up with things. Also, the fact that somebody else is doing something similar does not mean that you don't have space. There could be space in, so let me say social media, for example. Many of us may know of i5, MySpace. It was mentioned in the chat. But now, where are those social media? We have the likes of Facebook, Instagram, and so on. That at their launch, and they don't exist. They may still exist, but they are no longer popular at that point. Who would have thought that if when Uber was starting, you were saying that, oh, I'm going to have this internet-based app that is going to help you order taxis. People would say that, oh, you can get a taxi by just standing on the road. Why do you need an Uber? And so you may find a niche that the incumbents are not actually dealing with. You want to make sure that that niche is something that they may not really pay attention to for a while, because one of the exit strategy for startup is for you to be bought by an incumbent, your startup being bought by an incumbent. And I've supported a number of startups that were bought by larger organizations at different points in time, as CTO and as head of technology and so on. Those are interesting journeys. Large organizations don't want to take risk because the liability is really high on them. And so the reason the cost benefit analysis will not match. But as a startup, you can take those risks. And sometimes those risks may pan out and benefit you in such a way that you deliver a significant product into the market. Sometimes it may not pan out, or it may be that Google will just build a feature that will kill your startup overnight. That happens too. But the key point is don't be afraid to try. And yeah, so I think we just got one more minute. I hope this was useful. Did you learn something today? I would like to know. Could you drop something you learned during this conversation today? Could you drop it in the chat? Did you learn anything at all? Drop it in the chat. For those that are on the Slack community, drop it in the Slack community. For those that are on the WhatsApp community, drop it in the WhatsApp community. Let's continue the conversation. I would like that feedback as well. What did you learn during this session today? Drop it in the chat. And the key thing we were saying today is that don't be afraid to try, fail forward. And as you build your startup, be conscious of how you are building your individual profile as part of that journey. Thank you so much, and wishing you the very best in your journey. Thank you.